Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cherry the Geek TV. My name's Joe Vanourney. Charles Band really needs no introduction, but for those that don't know, he's a legend in the cult film community. He's going into his sixth decade of making movies. I can't believe that. 70s, 80s, 90s. It's true. We're going to talk about that in a second. Can you believe it?
All right.
360 films he's produced. He's directed a good chunk of them. He's started studios in different continents. He's owned castles. He's got a lot of history that we're going to talk about, and it's all part of a new book that he's written. It's called Confessions of a Puppet Master, a Hollywood Memoir of Ghouls, Guts, and Gonzo Filmmaking, which is going to be coming out November 16th from HarperCollins. Charles Band, welcome to Cherry the Geek TV.
Wow, I'm not sure what I can add to that. That's a lot. It's crazy.
Let's start back at the beginning. You were kind of born into the industry. Your father was a major player in the film industry at the time. For those that don't know, tell everybody who your father was and some of the films that he was involved in.
Yeah, he was, I mean, he was a major player. He started as assistant director with John Huston. They made movies like Asphalt Jungle, The Red Badge of Courage, and this is back late 40s, early 50s. Then he started a family, made some more movies. He took the family, including myself and my brother, to Sweden, where he made a movie called Face of Fire. Then he came back and made another movie with Richard Boone called I Bury the Living. But he also made, Westerns and later on the epics with Steve Reeves. And so he wasn't specific to one particular genre. And but I was lucky. He was a great father, and I grew up on a movie set. That's all I can remember. My early days, traveling, movie set, everything's bigger than life. Actors. He put me in some of the movies. I learned to hate that. I wanted to be behind the camera. That's where all the cool stuff was and the power. And I didn't want to be sitting there in a makeup chair and they're curling my hair to look like the son of Steve Reeves. And not my thing. But anyway, so that was my beginning. And then he decided when we were just little kids to take the family for 1 year to Europe. And that 1 year turned into 14 years. It was like, wow, but best thing that ever happened. So I grew up in Rome, Italy, basically. And Italian was kind of my first language, and English, I guess. So just very lucky. And then around my age, 20, my brother was 18. Things got bad for my dad. There was no money left. And we had he had to borrow money to bring the family back home to Hollywood. And that's kind of when I started my bizarro career in the early 70s.
Had you thought about that before that happened, before those incidents happened? Did you know, like, this is what I want to do when I grow up? A lot of kids, they kind of shun what their parents do as a career. Like, I don't want to get into that. That's my parents. But did you know, like, how early did you know,
No, there was no doubt I wanted to be in something creative. I wanted to be a movie maker guy. I mean, I was from like the earliest age, sort of this entrepreneur. I did crazy things even as a teenager that, if I had friends who had kids of my age and they said, yeah, my son at age 15 is going to open up a clandestine club in Rome, Italy and serve booze. And I go, your son's crazy. Don't let him do that. But I did a lot of stuff before I started making movies as a kid. And then when we came back to the States, I knew that's all I wanted to do was make movies. And I wanted to make, horror, sci-fi, fantasy horror films. Problem was a complete lack of money, no money. I mean, the family had no money. For the first few months of my grand return to Hollywood, was selling ties on Hollywood Boulevard at a men's clothing store, which sucked for everyone who bought ties from me because I'm completely colorblind. So I'm not sure what I did and how I turned these people on to whatever was supposed to match or not match. But again, I then invented a gift item business. That's another long story. We don't have a lot of time. And as a young kid, made a whole bunch of money and, of course, immediately invested in movies, and basically there's a million tributaries to the story. But I never stopped. I mean, I have not stopped making movies for all these years. And it keeps you excited and young if you're doing something you love. And the irony about this book is I wrote the book with Adam Felber, who's an amazing biographer. I told him my stories and he wrote the book because I'm not a writer, but he forced me to go back and remember stuff that I chose to forget because I'm very forward thinking. And that was during COVID, where things slowed down a little bit, even though we were still making movies. And the weird part is we had to wrap it up at the end of last year. And some of the craziest things in my career just started happening this year. We discovered an amazing place to shoot movies in Cleveland. I bought a mansion, haunted house. We're doing crazy stuff. We have 18 movies planned for next year, for 2022, which is about as many as I've ever made in a year. And it's like, well, wait a minute, the book is sort of ends last year, so I guess there'll be another book one day.
Well, that's good. There's so many stories in the book. There's like, I'm not even kidding, hundreds of stories. Some are short, some are a little longer. You kind of go chronologically and kind of bounce back a little bit back and forth, but for the most part, the book's telling a chronological story of your life in movies. Let's talk about some of those movies. We can't hit them all. There's not enough time. So many movies, not enough time. But I'm just gonna throw out some highlights that struck me personally when I was reading the book, and get your comment on it. And we're not spoiling. I mean, we're spoiling little bits of the book, but believe me, for people watching, we're just going to be scratching the surface of what's in the book. So if you like what you're hearing here, buy the book, because there's just a lot more of what these stories are. Talk about before we talk about the movie, I'm going to talk about your houses, because there's some interesting stories here. You bought Liberace's house in the Hollywood Hills. You lived there for one night.
One night. That's
What's
right.
up with that?
Well, my marriage wasn't going well, and I was at the time directing a movie, Demi Moore's first film, called Parasite. And because these are my confessions, right? I can't get into this too much in the minimal amount of time, but I knew the relationship was ending with my wife. And somehow during all that, I've been very lucky with real estate. It's not my thing, but somehow I've stumbled onto some amazing properties, the Houdini house up in Laurel Canyon, the studio in Italy, building a studio in Romania, the castle in Italy. So somehow my life is littered with these weird real estate stories. But in the case of the Liberace house, I somehow, during this period where things were really rough and I was going to move out, had this opportunity to buy Liberace's mansion in the hills. And it just, in my mind, which was completely addled with madness, because why would I even do this when I was definitely heading towards a divorce? But I had to do it. Bought the house. We were fixing it up. I was going to do a screening room. My wife and the two little kids, we all moved in there that night. I don't even know how you would characterize this as a sign, but it's right above Sunset Boulevard. And there's a famous building that Rod Stewart owned right below our house, maybe 2 streets below our house. And we were out there that night. I knew that this was a terrible mistake, and we smelled smoke. And before you knew it, that building, which was an old 1905, 1910 building, still there today, was on fire. It was burning down. It was a huge fire and fire engines. And we were literally, you could look down and see the fire and smoke. I thought, well, if this doesn't get under control, we are leaving quickly, because the whole neighborhood is going to burn down. Well, they got it under control. And if that wasn't the sign, I thought, I just can't do this. And I moved out. That was it. And we separated in a really nice way. We're still very close. The kids are now obviously adults. That was freaking long time ago, 40 odd years ago. But anyway, that all happened.
The other real estate story that's just fascinating to me is the castle in Italy. I laugh at when I read the story of how you got that and the price you got it for. Would you like to share that story of how you ended up owning a castle?
This is actually a real estate sort of podcast. So I've been a crazy collector my whole life, and one of the things I collected, because also I had some really bad times where I had to sell everything to survive. So there's a lot of ups and downs in the book. And I think even the downs were kind of humorous in a weird way. But I collected these old paintings from 16th, 17th century. They're called vanitas. And it's always the passage of time and the vanities. So the paintings would normally have a skull. I mean, all this stuff is stuff you can understand why I'm into it. Skull, a candle, jewelry, a pretty woman looking in a mirror with jewelry, but her reflection is a skull. I mean, they were very whimsical in a way, but, while these well-known artists were painting, chapels and, churches, in their off time, they would paint these sort of macabre vanitas paintings. Anyway, so I collected these things. And a friend of mine in Rome, who was an antique dealer, said, "Hey, you should know." I'm trying to make this a short story because none of these are that short. So I'm going to try to do this in 2 minutes. He said, "You should know that the largest castle in Umbria, it's 100,000 square feet. Umbria is right next to Lazio, where Rome is. So it's like 45 minutes from Rome. They're selling everything in the castle, including some really cool antiques. And I'm sure they have some Vanitas paintings. And the last item to be sold over the 5-day auction will be the castle itself." I thought, tell me where the hell it is. So, we went, I looked, it was mind blowing. Now, no one had lived in that place since the 40s, since World War II. The Germans had taken it over for a few years. So there was a custodian there. It's a long story, belonged to a family for hundreds of years, and everybody was up in arms. This family was now the young daughter, who everyone else was gone, decided she needed the party in Acapulco. She didn't want to have anything to do with this old castle. So she broke all tradition. She put all the contents up for sale, including the castle. So I went there, found some things I wanted. I had to get back to the States. I was making movies. And my friend convinced me, said, you should take a shot at actually buying the castle. And I go, well, no, I can't afford it. I mean, I was doing good. Things were good. I was during a good stretch. He said, well, they're opening the bidding at around 600, about a billion, I forget the lira. It was lira, a different currency back then. It was about $650,000. That was the opening bid. And then there were $25,000 increments. But famous people were showing up, the queen of this, the king of that. It was estimated to be $8 to $10 million property. But he said, let's just give it a whirl. Let me be your delegate, or whatever the word is in English. I'm the fellow who can bid on your behalf. You got to go to the Italian consulate in LA and sign me as the official bidder. He said, give it a shot. Who knows? And I'm thinking, all right, I'll have a moment where I can actually tell people I bid on a big 100,000 square foot castle. But then, of course, you had to send 25 grand, which qualified you as a bidder. They couldn't let any schmo just decide, hey, I'm bidding on a castle, and the guy runs away. So I sent the money. And then about a night before the actual auction of the castle, as it is, they had 4 days of auctions. I got a couple of the pieces. I got a painting. He calls me super excited because he was friendly with the auctioneers, and he said they're doing something really crazy. They're going to do an old auction, and I can't repeat this too well because I forget some of the beats, and I could do it better in Italian, but no one would understand unless you have a few Italian dudes watching this. But they did an old thing where they lit 3 matches. The first match, it's all sort of a archaic way of making it full of pomp and circumstance. First match, they tell the story of the castle. Second match, they talk about the bidding, and then the third match, they ask for the first bid, and if someone, the way I understood it at the time, if someone then bid right after that bid happened, then the auction would begin, and it'd be like a normal auction. You could bid it up to millions and millions of dollars. My guy was super excited because he found out what matches they were using. Okay, what was the brand of matches? So he was up all night with a stopwatch timing these matches, because his plan was to call that first bid a fraction before the match would burn out on my behalf. And if he did it the right way before the bidding began, then I get the castle for 675 grand or whatever it was. And that's what happened. That is what happened. And it was the headline of all the papers in Italy. Mysterious film producer steals the castle of Giove for a low bid. Investigation, this, that, and the other. But I got the castle, which was a big fixer-upper, and I had to get rid of it 5 years ago because of lack of money, But I had it for, since 1985 to maybe 5 years ago, and it was a great place. We shot movies there, Fit in the Pendulum, Meridian, Castle Freak, So it was great for the time.
Let's talk a little bit about some of your films and some of the stories in the film. During COVID, I got a chance to sit down and watch a lot of movies, as did most people. A lot of the movies I watched were first-time views for me, and one of them was Crawlspace, which I'd never seen before. I love the movie. You have a great story about working with the Klaus Kinski, who's got a reputation, his whole career, of being the most angry, volatile, difficult person to work with. What's your experience with Klaus Kinski? You talk about.
Well, I've worked with, I have made around 360 movies, and if you multiply the average of 10 to 15 characters per movie, a lot of actors. And I've worked with some wild ones, and I've worked with just about everything you can imagine. I would say the two actors who kind of neck and neck for wackiness was Klaus Kinski and Gary Busey. Now, the difference between the two, Gary Busey is out there, but that it's never going to come to blows. If he threatens you, it's just a lot of words. Whereas Klaus Kinski will punch you out. I mean, if he gets crazy enough, he'll stick a knife in you. He is definitely the real thing. And I'm really good with people, so this was not my sort of issue, but this is during the heyday of my owning a studio in Rome. It was the ex Dino De Laurentiis studio. And we called it Empire Studios, but that's the place where in the 60s they made the Bible, they made Barbarella, and I was lucky enough to get it in the mid 80s and own it for barely 3.5 years. And we made a lot of movies there, From Beyond and Dolls and Troll and Eliminators. We made a lot of pictures at that studio. It was a very heady experience. And one of those movies was Crawlspace. So here I am in Dino's office, which was gargantuan, right? We had maybe a smattering of 70, 80 people in the main building that probably housed 300. And there were 5 sound stages, and we had a bar where people had cappuccino, and in between, it was just magic for a few years. And then it all sort of disappeared. And I have a gal who runs in, and she goes, one of the assistants, she says, "You must come," in Italian, of course. I do speak fluent Italian. I'll do this thing in Italian if you want, but no, I won't do it. "Vieni subito, c'è un grande casino." Come right away. There's fucking crazy shit going on. Klaus Kinski is so pissed off at the director of Crawlspace, he's about to kill him. And I go, "Really?" Because, I had shit to do. And she said, no, they're in front of the stage. Come right away. And then I could tell from her voice, and I knew Klaus Kinski, who I got along with well. So I come down there. There's the usual crowd of 15, 20 people. They don't know what to do. Klaus has got the director, David Schmuller, by the lapel with a knife because he was pissed off at the shot that David set up. I mean, this is like, craziness. And it's a bigger story than what's in the book. And the book tells things that are, you'll have to read the book. But basically, I calmed the thing down. And I just said, Klaus, it wouldn't be good. And I talked to him literally in this voice. People were screaming. There was a girl crying. The director was sort of white and petrified. I go, "Klaus, it'd be a real bummer to not finish this movie, and we can't finish it if you kill the director," and stuff like that. And eventually he put the knife down and he breathed and things calmed down and they went back to work.
If that's a different time, right? The 80s. Do you think if Klaus Kinski was around today, and in his prime today, that he'd still be where he'd be done, right? He would be carried off
by the woke police. Who the hell knows? He was not an easy guy, and
he
He
existed.
was a wonderful actor. It just poured through his veins. Klaus. Check out Crawlspace. It's one of my many, many, many movies. Really bizarro film, but he was, talk about a method actor. He was that guy. He didn't hang out after he did a shot. He'd like chill out and have a little espresso. That did not happen. As a matter of fact, you did not want him to have an espresso.
Now, you mentioned Gary Busey as well, who you worked with on the Gingerdead Man. There's a great story. You worked with him for one day. He only had one day of that he was under contract with you,
yeah.
and yet tell the story. That's quickly. Okay, buy the book. There's a great story.
We have some more time. We got at least 10 more minutes. Something just moves. That's fine. I love talking to you, and I can't tell that story. You have to read
okay. Buy the book. It's a great story.
But it's just super inappropriate. It has to do with the bush. If you're wondering what is a bush, maybe you don't know what a bush is. So back in Gary Busey's younger years, women had that. And this story has to do with the bush. That's all I can say.
All right, buy the book. We lost Stuart Gordon recently. He got to work for you on a bunch of films, starting with Re-Animator and then going into the Empire Studios era with Dolls and From Beyond and Robot Jocks. Talk about your relationship with Stuart Gordon and what he was like to work with and collaborate with.
For good reason, I took the chance with a number of first-time directors. which is risky because if you make a small movie, you have limited time and limited budget. What goes against the grain is giving that movie, even with all the help you can muster, to someone who's never done it before. And that's what a first-time director is. You want someone who's done 10 or 15 movies, can go in there, understands the issues, can get the coverage. There's a whole, but then again, you also want to give a chance to new directors but it's a chance because I've had, without naming names, plenty of experiences, first-time director, and that was the only movie they made for me because they got carried away, they went over budget, the 1,000 reasons, none of them were bad guys, but it's not easy when you jump in and you have limited time and limited money to make a movie. Now, of course, a huge exception was Stuart. Stuart came on board. He was sort of hooked into with a guy named Brian Usna, a producer, who's a nice guy. And they became very friendly with my dad, who was sort of my right arm guy during those years. And they brought in this project, Re-Animator, a Lovecraft piece. And we all liked Stuart's spin on it. And again, there's a good material in the book, which we could spend hours talking. We get past 1 year. But it was a great relationship. And we went on to make From Beyond and Dolls and Robot Jocks and Castle Freak. And he was the sweetest guy. He hanging out with Stuart, you would never imagine the same guy was the fellow making all these bizarro, creepy, weird, horror movies with no lack of blood. But he was a good guy and a great father. And we were very close still to Carolyn, his wife, who also he put in every one of the movies, which was fun. So yeah, those were great years. We brought them to Italy. It was supposed to be 3-4 months. They were there a few years because we just keep making movies at the Empire Studios, one after the other. And the last show we did together was Castle Freak, which was really a pity we couldn't have done more. But then he got ill, and he left, which was really sad for everyone and all the movies he could have made if he was still around.
Well, we're going to jump ahead a little bit because we're running out of time. Like I said, I recommend the book just because there's so many movies we haven't even covered, but you can read about it in the book. I want to talk about what's next. I know that you've got Full Moon Features, the app where people can buy a subscription and stream all your movies online. I want to mention a couple of big projects that I have questions on, and then I'm going to ask you what else you've got going on. There's been rumors going around for a while that the Trancers might get a big budget reboot. I know Tarantino mentioned it on a podcast a year or two ago that he thought that movie was ripe for a big budget treatment, and I saw an interview that you did maybe a year ago. It said that's the developments were happening with that. What's the status?
It is. There's maybe 3 or 4 movies now. Pictures people are familiar with. Doll Man is an example, of course, Trancers, and a few others that are optioned, and they may wind up being big tentpole sort of mainstream reboots. And I think that's eventually going to happen. There's so many of these movies people grew up with, most of them discovered at their local video store. I run into literally hundreds of people who say, "God, I convinced my mom to rent Puppet Master, and I'll never forget it. I had the best night of my life. I was freaked out. I was crazy, and this and that." And it left such an impression. I mean, I have stories that I've heard over the years from poor kids, little kids who were trying to get potty trained, and they watched Ghoulies, with the frickin' poster with the ghoulie coming out of the toilet. I really screwed up those parents' plans, for a while. And then I met those kids later when they were adults, and they loved the whole thing. Yeah, I was scared shitless, but God damn, it was the best of this, of that. So, over the arc of all these movies, there's probably, 15 or 20 that are, I don't know what to call them. People say cult classics. I mean, people remember them, so a lot of those, or at least 4 or 5 right now, are in that position of maybe getting a mainstream reboot, which would be great because we did create the Full Moon universe many, many years ago. And even back in the early 90s, when Paramount distributed the movies, we had Doll Man movies, we had Demonic Toys movies. Then I did a crossover. I had Doll Man versus the Demonic Toys. And more recently, our second most successful series, believe it or not, is Evil Bong. We've made 9 of them. Also Gingerdead Man, the first one with Gary Busey. So we also made Gingerdead Man versus the Evil Bong. So we're having fun with the franchises. But I think that if, 1 or 2 of these movies get rebooted and they're well made and they're fun and they they stick to the fun characters just with more frills, and they're successful, then I think Full Moon becomes more of a mainstream thing, and we may have happened to us what happened to Marvel. I mean, Marvel was just a comic book company. They great comics, amazing stories, and then a few independents tried to make those movies for no money, like Roger Corman made the Fantastic Four for $5, and Marvel bought him out just to kind of get rid of that so they could make the big budget Marvel films. And now that's the whole business. I mean, it's an amazing story. And as a kid, I grew up reading those books, and I was inspired by Stan Lee, who became a friend for many years, with his Stan Lee soapbox. If you were a kid in Italy in the 60s and there was no anything, no internet, no TV, nothing, you go to the movies, see weird Italian movies. Once in a blue moon, an American film dub would come out and you'd see something that was, in the genre. But otherwise, it was great music of the 60s for me, and comics, and the comics I loved were Marvel comics. And, I loved the artwork. And as a little kid, I couldn't quite figure out what it all meant until suddenly Stan Lee did Stan Lee's soapbox, where you could read at the back of the book that Jack Kirby did this art and Steve Ditko did that. And then you realize, oh, that's cool. That's why I like that art, and Jack Kirby and Fantastic Four and the Hulk. And it gave you a little glimpse behind the scenes. So in the early days of video, I think I'm rambling on here, Geek, but whatever. In the early days of video, I thought, the late 80s, no one did this. I thought I should create a video magazine that goes behind the scenes. We talk with the actors, the special effects, talk about the next movie. Let me do that and stick it at the end of the VHS tape, which we did. We called it the Video Zone. So I was the first to do that. It took a lot of convincing at Paramount. They were our distributor, because they said, well, how do we monetize that? I go, well, you don't. It's just something fun for the fans. Well, it's going to cost a few extra pennies because it's 20 more minutes of tape. So whatever. So, but luckily we prevailed, and for all those movies we did the Video Zone. A little later, when DVD happened, that became the norm. But I have hundreds of letters, and fans still say, gosh, I didn't know anything about anything until I started watching those Video Zones, and sometimes they were better than the movie. I go, okay, well, that's true. They were entertaining because no one knew how all this stuff was done back then.
The other film I want to mention, talk about real quick, just get the status of, is Primevals. Your friend Dave Allen's been pitching that to you since the 70s. He started filming it in the 90s and then sadly passed away before it was completed. I think he stopped doing a lot of stop motion animation. There's, I think, 150 of the 250 shots were completed. And recently there's been work done to complete the film. What's the status? A lot of people have been waiting a long time for this.
Yeah, well, 30 odd years. So Dave and I met in the 70s. He was Ray Harryhausen's protege. His claim to fame at the time, other than doing cool shots for small, weird movies, is he did the animation for the Pillsbury Doughboy. So if you saw a stop motion animated Pillsbury Doughboy before CGI came along, Dave Allen did those shots. Anyway, I was dying to get some stop motion, being an insane Ray Harryhausen fan. Jason or the Argonauts, Seven Voyages of Sinbad. I met Dave and I said, I'm making this little sci-fi movie called Laser Blast. And it's one of those movies that, again, that could be remade into a big movie and it would be totally perfect today. For those who haven't seen it, aliens come to Earth briefly, carelessly leave this laser blast gun in the desert. This kid who we establish is being bullied, gets pushed around. The copy line was, Billy was a kid who got pushed around until he found the power. Basically, he finds this laser gun the aliens left, and he blows up all his enemies and blows up buildings. And then he starts morphing into a monster, and then the aliens come back and get their gun back. I mean, real silly, but I needed someone to do the stop motion animation for the aliens. So I met David and convinced him to do it. And he said, the one thing I want you to know is I have a passion project that I'd love you to finance one day. It's called the Primevals. I said, sure. I said, what is it? He says, well, it'll take 10 or 12 weeks to shoot. It's probably $5 or $10 million. It's got 200. I go, whoa, okay. I'm making movies. I mean, I was happy to get 8 stop motion animation shots for Laser Blast. But I said, look, just, let's stick together. So over the years, Dave did many of my movies, little moments, the Puppet Master movies and Dolls and, a lot of Dave Allen stop motion animation. And then finally in the early 90s, when we were doing great briefly, it was time to make the Primevals, and we set it up. In fact, it was 12 weeks. It was $5+ million, which was usually 10 of our movies. And we shot it all over the planet in the Italian Dolomites. We shot part of it at the studio in Romania. My dad was the on-set producer because I needed to trust someone to make sure the 12 weeks didn't become 20 weeks and go broke. And we wrapped the movie and then began what was supposed to be a 2-year stretch to do 250 stop motion animation shots, sort of the heart of this movie. And about 150 shots into that, poor Dave passed away super young from cancer. And that was exactly at the time when our fortunes turned for the worst. Long story there, it's in the book. And so we literally packed everything up to see a better day where we could go and finish the Primevals. And that day arrived maybe 2.5 years ago. Chris Endicott, who was Dave's protege, decided he'd be willing to spend the time, and he can also do great stop motion. He would find the remaining few people who know how to do it, since it's a dying art. And we're now maybe 3-4 months away from finally finishing the movie. So for sure next year, finally, 30 odd years later, we'll have the movie out.
That's awesome. A lot of people excited for that.
Yeah.
We are sadly out of time. Like I said at the beginning, we're barely going to scratch the surface of all the great stuff that's in the book. But you can get the book November 16th. It's called Confessions of a Puppet Master, a Hollywood Memoir of Ghouls, Guts, and Gonzo Filmmaking. Get it from your local bookseller or wherever you buy your books. If people want to watch your movies, Full Moon Streaming.
You go to we have 2 ways you can see the movies. You can go on Amazon if you're a Prime member and subscribe. It's Full Moon Features. Or we started an app, fullmoonfeatures.com. I mean, you can watch those movies on, Roku, on Apple TV. The difference between the two is we put a little more weird stuff. We're allowed to kind of put more bizarro content up on the app. Amazon is a little more strict, but both equally cool. And yeah, you can see literally almost 1,000 movies now between our movies, my movies, and other movies we've licensed that are genre films. It's an exploitation channel is what it is.
I know there's a lot of Blue Underground films on there too. And
we got it all. And yeah, the book's on pre-sale now. You can go to Amazon or anywhere and get it. Comes out in 2 weeks. And I want to say one last thing. It's, I'm sure some people will be disappointed that I don't have stories and for every Puppet Master movie. And if you watch one of my movies every day, it'll take you a year. I've made a lot of movies. This is more a book. I mean, there's stories about some of the movies, but this is a book about entrepreneur and what it takes to try to combine the arts and finance, because you still want to be able to survive and still make movies or make music or do whatever it is that you dream of doing. And it's really the story of someone who's gone through ups and really, really terrible downs. So, I mean, you read the book.
That's one of the things that's impresses me about you, because I work 7 days a week. I have multiple jobs. I'm doing a bunch of things, and I'm exhausted. I look at the stuff that you're juggling with making movies every month. Plus the real estate stuff and opening a restaurant and raising a family and buying castle, doing all that stuff. There's a quote that John Carpenter, I think, put on your book. He says, he is one of those guys who never experiences failure because he just moves on to the next thing. They say when the atomic bomb goes off, all that will be left will be cockroaches and Charlie Band. And
I'm honored. John and I go back many years. He was my editor under a different name on my first movie. So there's so much history. It's all in the book, obviously. But yeah, you just got to keep
looking forward and don't judge you don't look back at the past. Just keep moving forward. And
absolutely.
You're an impressive man, my friend.
And thank you very much. Hope whoever gets the book enjoys it, and got to think about the next one, because there's so much going on this year. It's like, wait a minute, how do I put it back in here? But no, it's 40 odd years of madness. It's enough for a few sittings.
Well, Charles, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for joining us on Jerry the Geek TV.
Take care. Good luck to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.